My name is Erica Santiago. I'm the Deputy Court Administrator for the Circuit Court of Prince George's County, Maryland, and wanted to welcome you to the State of the State Courts 2015 poll, where we will receive information from our wonderful panelists regarding what the customers see from the court's perspective. How do they feel? What do they think of us? With that being stated, I would like to introduce Jesse Rutledge. Good morning. We have Stephanie Hess in the back and Jonathan Mattiello. We will begin now.
Thank you, Erica. Good morning. I'm Jesse Rutledge. I am with the National Center for State Courts. Hopefully everybody can hear me well enough. And thank you for joining us this morning for our session on public trust and confidence in the courts. And we're hoping that this will be a good session with lots of useful information for you. We're going to provide an update on the state of public opinion about the courts, as Erica indicated, and we'll be hopefully doing a little bit of direct engagement with everybody in the room as we walk through the information, and then we will be having our panel respond to the findings, giving us their perspectives from where they sit, and then towards the end we're going to engage in some real-time polling. So we're going to turn things around, and rather than looking at poll responses from the public, we are going to poll you all, and I'm going to begin by asking you to do something that no presenter should ever do, which is take out your phones. How's that for a great start? We're always being told to put them away. Towards the end of the session, we're going to engage in some real-time polling using a tool called Poll Everywhere. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can certainly use your mobile device. You can use any internet-connected device you have. Poll Everywhere has an app for tablets and for phones. You can go to your app store and you can download that so you are ready to roll when we get to that part of the presentation. You can also they have a mobile website which will work, and if you prefer, you can also participate through text messaging. We will get to the specific instructions of how that's going to work once we get to that portion of the session, but I wanted to give you a heads up that this is coming so you can download the app and be ready to go at that point. We're going to begin today by reviewing the survey results from the National Center for State Courts 2015 survey, public opinion survey. And I want to begin by providing a little bit of context for where this survey work came from. About 3 or 4 years ago, at the National Center, we started to get a lot of feedback from stakeholders in the community saying, we're having a really hard time talking to the public and talking to people who deal with our budgets about our issues. And we're all being decimated by cuts to our courts. And when we go and talk to people about our problems, they're sort of saying, talk to the hand. We don't want to hear it. We feel like we're not talking effectively to these people with the right messages and the right language. And can you help us figure this out? So we took this as a bit of a challenge, and we partnered with an organization called Justice at Stake. In 2012, we did our first in this sort of series of nationwide public opinion surveys to better understand, in that context, how to talk about issues related to courts and budgets. And we produced a handbook called Funding Justice, and we distributed that widely across the court community in an effort to enable all of us to do a better job talking to the public and to budget writers. And we had a fair amount of success with that. We got very positive feedback saying, yeah, this actually really worked, this helped us. We're now breaking through the noise and people are better understanding what we're trying to say. And we kind of took a lesson from that, and we decided that we would start a new annual survey at the National Center to sort of look at what the public thinks and to give us some information and some guidance, because you don't really know what you should be doing unless you're also listening. And so I see this as an essential part of a newfound emphasis on listening to the public, understanding where they are, and then enabling us to be better in our responses and to be more responsive to what the public wants. So that's kind of how we got to where we are with doing these surveys. Excuse me. We didn't just sort of grab a bunch of questions out of thin air based on what 3 or 4 of us thought were the important topics. We assembled an advisory committee of members from the court community to help us think through what the issues were, and to sort of develop the concepts for what we wanted to survey. And this was our survey advisory committee. On the left is Chief Justice Mark Cady, the Chief Justice of Iowa. Lori Dudgeon, who you just heard from across the hall, was on our advisory committee for this work. My co-panelist, colleague, NACIM president, and National Center board member, Stephanie Hess, was involved in developing these ideas. My colleague, David Rotman, from the National Center, who's been doing public opinion work for 2 or 3 decades, and myself. And what we did was we sort of gathered the concepts, and none of us are expert in kind of writing questions, framing questions that you might put on a survey. And so what we then did was we hired a public opinion firm to help us do that part of it. We work with a firm called GBA Strategies, which is based in Washington, D.C., and we've now done several surveys with them. They are they're a nationwide public opinion research group. They do political work, campaign work, ballot initiative work, but they also do foundation work and corporate work. And so they've got a real breadth of expertise, and they've done a substantial amount of work in the justice arena over the last 10 years. We conducted this survey by telephone in late October of 2015. And there's a lot of conversation out there about whether or not survey work is reliable in the first place, whether polls really tell us what people think, and whether or not you can actually reach people, whether you can reach a representative sample of people, because so many people are now not using landlines, and historically polls have always been conducted through calling people on their landlines. Well, that is shifting, and pollsters are able to contact people on their cell phones. They're able to make sure that the sample that they gather is reflective of the demographics of the entire population. And so we've got a fair amount of confidence that the results that we have back from this sample are very reflective of public opinion at that particular point in time. The margin of error on this survey is 3.1 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So to try to tell you what that means that if we contacted any 1,000 American voters over these same dates, that 19 times out of the 20 times we did that, we would get results that are within 3 percentage points of the numbers you're going to see here. So 95% of the time, we would get numbers that would be within 3 percentage points of what you're going to see. And that gives us a fairly high degree of confidence that this is a statistically significant survey and that it is an accurate reflection of people's perspectives at this point in time. Keep in mind, it's sort of limited to these particular days. Events change, things happen in the news, the public's attention can shift based on any number of factors, but as a snapshot for a moment in time, we have a high degree of confidence that this survey is very accurate. Let me begin by going over some of the key findings at a high level, and then I'll get into some of the details, some of the supporting evidence for our conclusions. We find that support for the courts is stronger than it was in the heart of the recession, meaning when we looked at the numbers compared to 2012, the numbers on basic confidence barometers are stronger than they were then. But we did do the same survey in 2014, and we actually found a decline in a lot of the baseline numbers. And you'll see that as I go into some detail here. So there's a little bit of a up and down trend that we're seeing in overall confidence in the courts. That said, there is still a strong sense that the courts are the most trusted branch of the 3 branches of government. We also find that there are concerns about inefficiency and unfairness, and that those concerns are deep-seated and real. And there are kind of two pieces to this. The inefficiency part I would describe as kind of a waning of consumer confidence in how the courts are doing their business. Customer service issues, really. The unfairness is a second aspect of it, and that is much more rooted in economics and in race. And you'll see that as I go through the survey findings, that you see some big divisions depending on where people sit economically and racially. The takeaway from this is that these kinds of concerns are potentially making the public much more interested in alternatives to traditional court dispute resolution. And this is what I would call a very high level and a very preliminary finding. I'm not overly concerned about this one. I think it's a very interesting takeaway, that as these concerns harden, people are starting to think about alternatives to solving disputes rather than the traditional approach of going into a court. And then finally, and probably the most startling finding here, is that there is a big racial divide in perceptions of the courts, and African Americans express significantly less faith in the courts than the population as a whole does. Now, we're able to make this conclusion based on the fact that we did an oversample of African Americans in our survey work. And what that means is that because we talked to more African Americans than we would normally to reflect the demographics of the population, we have stronger confidence that the takeaways that we're coming away with here are accurate because of the oversample of African American voters. There's the key findings. I should also say I'm really more interested in you all stopping me and saying, I don't get this or I disagree with that. We're taking questions as we go. I don't want to just talk at you, or none of us want to just talk at you for this whole session. So if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand. And because we're streaming and videotaping this, I'll ask you to come to the microphone so that everybody who is out there in the ether is hearing your question as well. Okay? So as I said at the outset, the public is more optimistic than they were 3 years ago, but potentially less favorably disposed towards the courts than they were last year around the same time. And you can look at the 2015 numbers, it's the dark red line in the middle, and you can see that across a number of key barometers that we ask respondents about, there is a drop from 2014. So when we ask the question, do the following words or phrases describe the state courts very well, well, not very well, or not well at all, only 60% of the population agree that the term fair and impartial describes the courts either well or very well. And that's 3 points down from where we were about this time in 2014, but 3 points higher than we were in 2012. So when the pollster looks at this and gives us his analysis of these numbers, you know, he says sort of what I'm saying, which is, well, you're sort of somewhere in the middle. But his real point is this number, the 60% number, is way too low. Way too low. This is our core mission, to be fair and impartial. And we only have 6 out of 10 Americans who believe that we're doing that. So that is, that's a problem. And you can see it across all these barometers. These numbers in the 60s and the 50s really should be much higher. If we feel like we are delivering on our mission, then people will reflect that by giving us much higher grades on barometers like providing good customer service, providing equal justice, and whether or not the courts are a good investment of taxpayer dollars. So we've got some work to do here. As I said before, across the board, we're seeing numbers that are dropping a little bit from a year ago. And again, a series of barometers here showing that the decline is across every single part of, or every single question we ask, we're seeing a drop. So it's very consistent, and again, it kind of gives us confidence that the findings are true because they're consistent across all of these to one degree or another. there is some good news. You're going to see a lot of bad news in the information that I'm providing this morning. There is some good news, and I want to spend a moment talking about where the good news is. Procedural fairness is seen as a strength of the court system overall. And procedural fairness, I think probably everybody knows what procedural fairness is. It's basically, I've got the world's leading expert on this is sitting in the room here, so I have to be careful what I say. But it's essentially the sense that when somebody goes into court, they feel like the process is fair, that they're heard, that they get a rational explanation for what is happening, and that they leave the court feeling like whether they won or lost, or whether they weren't even involved as a litigant, what happened inside the courtroom was fundamentally fair. It's fundamentally just to the mission. And the way that we come up with the takeaway on this is we filtered our respondents based on those who had actually gone inside a courtroom, who had had an experience, and we asked people in the survey, have you had any of these number of experiences? And then we asked a question only of those people who said, yes, I've been inside a courtroom. And the question is, regardless of the outcome, were you satisfied with the fairness of the process in your dealings with the court system? And we've got 70% of respondents saying, yeah, I'm satisfied. So that's a pretty good takeaway there. People, once they get inside the real workings of a process, they feel like it is going pretty well. And that number holds pretty consistent with our 2014 finding, which I think was at 70 or 71%. The other piece of good news on this is that in spite of the negative information that I'm going to follow this with, when we ask people about how they would rate the job being done by the courts in their state, that the overall job approval numbers are actually up over 2014, really just a hair. You can see that we've gone from 45% saying that the courts are doing a good job in 2014 to 48% saying they're doing a good job in 2015. Again, in both cases, we're not even getting a majority. So, there's a little bit of a silver lining that I'm reaching for here, but it is a trend in the right direction on these numbers. Any questions on this? Peter, if you want to ask a question, I'll ask you to come up to the mic.
Just to clarify for me, though, 70% of the folks who had actual contact with the court system said that they felt that they had received a fair outcome. It was a fair and fair process. Though I'm thinking back from some previous surveys that we may have seen that somewhere less than 5% of the public actually ever has physical contact with the court. So we're talking about 70% of 5%?
Well, in this particular case, we actually found a much higher number of respondents who said that they had some outcome. Actually, was closer to 80 to 85% of our respondents who said that they had had some direct contact with the courts. So we have conflicting numbers for sure. Yes, sir, Jeff.
Do you have any statistics on why 2012 was so low? Or
well, we have statistics showing that those numbers were very low.
I understand the numbers, but is there
a reason why?
Yes.
The hypothesis would be the recession, and that people were just so economically challenged that to a certain degree, people's attitudes towards how government is functioning, how they are doing in their own lives daily, colors their perceptions of how things are working in other aspects of life, society, and government. And so, when you look back at surveys from 2010, 2011, 2012, a barometer question that pollsters always ask is about the economy, and do you feel like the economy is getting better or worse? And in those years, those numbers were trending down, down, down. They have started to trend back up. They're not going gangbusters back up, but basically, the short answer is the recession. Okay. Moving along, I also want to highlight that I'm not showing you all the detail from our 2014 survey. It's available on our website if you want to look at it. But we essentially replicated all of the key findings from the 2014 survey. Nothing really had changed. As I indicated a moment ago, courts remain the most trusted branch of government of the three. We have concerns that respondents who reported direct contact with the courts give lower ratings on customer service and job performance than those who do not have direct contact with the courts. And this is a very important takeaway. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but this goes against the traditional perspective that to know us is to love us. If only people had more information about us, had more contact with us, came to see us more often, if only we were out there, educating them, if they just knew more, then our numbers would go up. Well, our 2014 survey results indicate the opposite, that the more contact they have, the less trust they have. And that's a problem, obviously. Courts are not seen as doing enough with technology to improve customer service. We're going to talk a bit about that later in this session, because we want to talk about what some possible customer service improvements could be that would involve technology. And then lastly, the concerns persist about the influence of politics and personal beliefs in case decision making. In other words, there are too many people out there who think that judges are not making decisions based on the facts and the law. They're making decisions based on their personal beliefs or their political predilections. So that hangs out over especially in the states that have contested partisan judiciaries. It's worse. That perception is stronger in those states than in other states, but it is high across the board. So now I want to turn to one of the focuses that the advisory committee really wanted to dig into, which was this idea that there are sort of two systems of justice in America, and depending on where you sit, you might get a different experience in the court system. And as the slide indicates, these beliefs in unequal justice are deep-seated and widespread. And as this slide shows, they are they are accentuated by the color of your skin. And put simply, African Americans have a more cynical view about this than the rest of the population does. What we did to come to these conclusions was we put together a list of about 11 demographic groups, and we put them on the survey. And those were the groups that you see up on the screen, but also groups like the middle class, the college-educated, various other groups. And from those 11, about 6 of those, a majority of respondents said they actually get the same treatment as everybody else. Nothing to see here, people. They're not getting any special treatment. But there were 5 groups that our respondents identified as getting either better treatment from the system or worse treatment from the system. And that's what this slide shows, is what those groups are. So our respondents told us that when we asked them whether a group is treated better or worse, that the wealthy, 68% of the overall population believe that the wealthy get a better experience in the system than the rest of society. 69% believe that large corporations get a better shake. And then the dark blue numbers on the right there, accompanying those two, those are the perspectives of the African American community. So you can see that that level of perception that the wealthy and large corporations are getting a better shake is higher amongst African Americans. Down below are the 3 groups that the public thinks get a worse shake in the court system. And there are 3: African Americans, divorced fathers, and the poor. The middle one, divorced fathers, barely sort of registered at this level, but to be sort of true to how I was presenting this information, I wanted to include them because a small majority feel like divorced fathers get a worse shake. That's probably the sort of the Mad Dad movement that's out there. But the real interest here is on the left and the right on the bottom side here, where about half of the population, 49%, believe that African Americans get worse treatment. And then, probably not terribly surprising, when you ask African Americans this question, 79% of African Americans say that African Americans get worse treatment. And then over on the far right, 59% of the overall sample thinks that the poor gets a worse shake, and 80% of African Americans believe that the poor get a worse shake. So you can see that there are very strong perceptions about certain people getting a better treatment or a better experience, and certain others getting a worse one, and that is accentuated by race. I'm going to talk a little more about how race impacts perceptions of fairness, because we get into a lot of the, I think, conversation that is happening at the national level is being reflected here in these figures. When we ask our respondents to agree or disagree with the following statements about state courts, we get slightly different answers depending on whether the respondent is African American or not. And so you can see that when we ask people to agree or disagree that state courts treat people with dignity and respect, that 66% of the overall population believe that they do so, but that number drops to 50% when the respondent is African American. And you can see this across the board. And these are big gaps. These are not small gaps. This is not a point or two. We're talking about spreads of between 15 and 20 percentage points between African Americans and the population as a whole. And that is got to be a cause for concern. The number that jumped out at me when I first read the survey results is right here on the right-hand side in the bottom right corner, because we looked at whether or not both groups believe that the courts provide equal justice. Sort of a fundamental tenet of our system is that the courts provide equal justice. And you can see that 57% of the overall sample believes that the courts are providing equal justice, but only 32% of African Americans believe that courts provide equal justice. Fewer than 1 in 3 African Americans hold that belief. And that is a huge, not just a huge discrepancy, but it's got to be something that we look at ways to address in the work that we do, because that cannot go on. All right, so with that somewhat gloomy news about people's perceptions about both unequal treatment in the courts, again, influenced by whether or not you are white or black, we get to the point where a lot of the population is perhaps looking at the system overall and thinking, do I want to be a part of this system? And we have lived for a long time in a world where people really didn't have the choice. But they're starting to have many more choices about how to resolve their disputes, in a lot of situations at least, if not in all of them. And so we started from the perspective of, overall, if you have a problem you need to resolve, do you want to resolve it in court, or do you want to resolve it some other way? And it's probably not a huge surprise to find out that only 31% of our respondents across the board want to have their issues resolved in a court. I mean, you've got to be in a pretty bad position in your life to have to go into a court in the first place. It's usually not a happy process. And so that finding is perhaps not a huge surprise. What we found, though, was that 64%, so more than 2 to 1, would prefer an alternative. Now, I know that alternative dispute resolution is a loaded phrase. ADR means something, but I just want you to know that we did not run through all the traps in the survey about what ADR is or isn't, and all of the upsides and the downsides. I'm just using this as a label to describe kind of the alternative that we presented in the survey. Court system or some other option, online dispute resolution, mediation, some other alternatives that we gave them. And then we lumped this together to get this fairly strong number. People saying, no, I'm going to go over to some other system. Maybe I'll check out of the court system entirely. We then thought, okay, well, that's where people are at sort of the high level. Let's add some more information. Because sometimes part of developing an effective message is, people have a certain place they start from. And an effective communications campaign can change people's minds if you add additional information, and that can inform what you do strategically. So we followed it up with a question that added more information onto both sides of the spectrum. And we asked people to make a choice between one of these two statements. And the statement that we started with for the court system is that the court system is the best way to resolve disputes because it protects individual rights and is accountable to the rule of law. We then asked, as an alternative, statement number 2, alternative ways to resolve disputes like mediation are faster, cheaper, and more responsive to the needs of the people they serve than the court system. And we get almost exactly the same results as we did on the previous question. This information moves almost nobody in any direction. And that's useful information for us to have. I'll tell you that that first statement about the court system was something we spent a lot of time chewing over, because we want to, if we're going to test a message, we want to test what we think is the strongest message. And I've been doing public opinion work about the courts for 15 years, and I know from my previous research that when you talk about the court system, if you talk about the fact that the courts protect individual rights, that they're accountable, and that there's rule of law, those are the things that people really want from the court system. So this was, from my perspective, just about the strongest language we could come up with. Say, these are the strong points for the courts, here they are. In spite of that, it appears that people want faster, cheaper, and more responsive on the other side. So, food for thought. This is not to say that we're all going to, not have any customers tomorrow, but it is probably a trend that we should keep an eye on and think about how this informs the work we're doing to be more responsive on customer service issues. Speaking of customer service issues, knowing what we now know about people's cynicism about the level of customer service that's being provided, we wanted to dig down a little bit deeper and ask people whether or not they felt like we should just sort of break down the system and start again, or whether or not we could find improvements, kind of upgrades within the system that would allow people to feel like they were getting more bang for their buck. And this is going to be the most complicated slide that I have to explain to you. I will perhaps struggle in how I do it. It's hard to present this information graphically. What we did was we took our 1,000 respondents, and 500 of them got asked one pair of questions, and the other 500 got asked a separate pair of questions. But the trick is that all of them got asked this first part of the statement, which is the status quo statements. Status quo statement. State courts should continue to operate as they do now. So that's kind of the baseline that we asked everybody. And we asked half of our group a change statement, which basically said state court operations need a complete overhaul. And when we set this question pattern up, my expectation, based on what I've seen over the years, was that we would get a stronger response on this one, that this is where we were going to really show the failings and where we were going to fall down. So I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I was wrong, because the second half of the sample actually responded more favorably to the idea that we could find new technologies to improve current conditions. So the takeaway here is that while people are cynical about customer service, they're willing to give us opportunities to improve and fix the system that exists, rather than saying we're doing nothing right, scrap it and start again. So again, not that there are a lot of silver linings in here, but this might be one of them. The last slide that I'm going to show you focuses on the fact that we now live in a self-service society, and people are looking for options to help themselves in every aspect of life, and that extends now into resolving their disputes in the court system. And we actually asked a question of all of our respondents: if at all possible, I would prefer to handle a problem myself rather than have a lawyer represent me. And we had 56% agree with that statement and 41% disagree. I think this is a number that we'll probably continue to see grow. The agree portion of this is going to continue to grow over the years. People are simply becoming more accustomed to trying to resolve issues in their lives themselves, and we need to be attuned to that. The challenge for us comes in the follow-up, where we ask people whether we're really helping them help themselves. And the answer there is that they don't really think so. They don't see that being done. It comes back to the customer service issue. And so when we take a couple of different paired statements and ask people whether or not courts are effectively providing information and assistance so that individuals can navigate the court system without hiring an attorney, we're only getting 29% agreeing with that statement. By more than 2 to 1, people are in the other camp, which is that we're not doing enough. We need to do more to help them help themselves. So that is the entirety of the survey results that I have for you, and I'll stop here. I want to see if there are any questions about anything that you've seen or heard to this point. Yes, sir. Stand up to the mic, please.
Good afternoon or morning. Did you break it out by region at all? Did you ask the same series of questions state by state? And if so, did there reveal some of us are doing it better or worse than others? Where can we steal good ideas, kind of thing?
Well, that's a good question. This is a national survey, and so what that means is that we can't pull out state level data, and it would actually be really hard for us to even pull out regional level data and have it mean anything. So it's not helpful in terms of comparing different parts of the country, is the short answer. Judge Burke.
Jesse, in a previous survey, there was the question that was asked about intimidation. Do you describe, what word would you describe the courts? And if I remember, it was 39%. Right. Did you ask anything in this survey that would go directly to the idea about intimidation about being in court?
I don't remember. I would need to go back and look to see if we asked that same question. We asked some of the questions we have sort of recurring from year to year. I'm not sure if that particular question recurred.
Can I make a suggestion as
Sure.
you go forward in the new ones? I think that is a key to moving up fair and impartial courts. If you feel intimidated, you want to get out of there really fast. So when you said, to know us is to love us, well, if to know you is to be intimidated by you, I want to get out of there.
Right.
So I think that a key strategy has to be, I need to end up looking at my courthouse and figure any possible way to reduce a sense of intimidation. From the magnetometer person to the person at the counter, every opportunity to reduce intimidation increases the probability of fair and impartial. And intimidation also interferes with your ability to understand what's going on.
Right.
So you get false positives. Do you understand? I want out of here. Yes. So I really do think that intimidation as you go forward with surveys is kind of a key thing of being able to figure out if that does drive people's not liking us, then we need to figure out how to fix that.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. I'll go back and look. And I know that NACM's guide this year focuses on user-friendly courts. I'll leave Stephanie to comment on what's in that guide and what people should expect sort of going in that direction. Any other questions on the hard data at this point? One more question.
I was just curious if the survey took into account their role in the case, defendant versus, plaintiff in a civil case or victim.
Excuse me. It did not. And this is one of the limitations of a national survey that's trying to get at really big picture, high-level issues, is that we can't get down to that sort of granular level of what was your experience. That kind of understanding where people are coming from at that level is actually really great focus group work, where you can get a collection of people together who've had a similar experience, and then you can visit with them about their takeaways. So we've done a little bit of focus group work in this area, but it's hard to get that level of detail out of a long telephone survey where you're just trying to figure out if people are going to stay on the phone long enough. So I wish I had a more satisfying answer for you, but that's the best I can give. Okay, great. Thank you for following along with me, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jonathan, who is going to offer some perspectives from the State Justice Institute.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Mattiello. I'm the executive director of the State Justice Institute. I see some new faces. So SJI, we are a quasi-federal agency that was created by Congress to award grants to state courts. And we have a 11-member board of directors made up of chief justices, judges, a state court administrator, and 4 members from the public. Jesse, can I close this? Is that okay? Or will it kill everything? Yeah, okay, all right. Sorry, I'm just moving my notes a little bit here. I just killed something.
Let me fix this another way.
Our chair of our board is Chief Justice Chase Rogers from Connecticut. Our vice chair is Dan Becker, who is the state court administrator of Utah. SJI's mission is to award grants to improve the administration of justice in our state courts, and we have a long history of helping state courts with with projects around public trust and confidence. Back in 1999, in partnership with the Department of Justice, we sponsored a major summit on public trust and confidence in the courts. And really a lot of the efforts around that summit was what Jesse's describing, to know us is to love us. How do we better educate the public on what the court's mission and key role is? Unfortunately, I think it's evidence, we haven't really come very far. And I think the survey results that Jesse just walked through clearly show that, especially among minority communities, that we have a long way to go. One of the things that I was thinking when Jesse was talking is, the public, general public, average citizen doesn't really differentiate too much between what the courts do versus prosecution, defense, police. I mean, it's all just a system to most people, and frankly, not very many people are ever going to experience court unless maybe it's a traffic ticket. So when you saw the events in Ferguson and you saw CNN and other news networks with their cameras trained on the Ferguson Police Department and the outside of that building, what did it say below it? Well, it said Ferguson Police Department and Municipal Court, right? So just thinking about it from, we know this is common, right? That there's co-location of courts and police and whoever, just because this is how our communities are structured with limited space. But sort of think about how that looks to someone coming from the outside who's not familiar. And they've got to show up for a traffic ticket, and we've heard in some extreme cases where the chief of police is actually the judge that day, or perhaps it's an attorney who's just a part-time judge a couple of days a month. Most people are going to experience justice in these contexts, in these local courts. So we're trying to see it through that lens more with some of the work that we're focusing on. I won't really go into the surveys so much. Jesse did a great job of highlighting that. But I will tell you a little bit about specifically what SJI is trying to do to address public trust and confidence in our state courts. The first is a partnership between the Conference of Chief Justices, Conference of State Court Administrators, the National Center for State Courts, and a national consortium on racial and ethnic fairness in the courts. It's called our Court Community Engagement Strategy. And this is bringing together minority community leaders from across the U.S., along with representatives from our courts, to focus on how do we better reach out and engage these communities to make them, to hear what they have to say and potentially make them ambassadors for the state courts, because they have the connections needed to reach these communities that the courts don't always have. So certainly we're talking about minority groups, we're talking about religious groups, really that outreach strategy. Again, engaging rather than educating. And through these discussions that we're having through this initiative, there will be demonstration projects and pilot projects that this group identifies that we'll test across the United States. And the hope is that we'll be able to replicate these projects in other jurisdictions. We've also got a great partnership with Tavis Smiley and PBS We're hosting Tavis Smiley Show is hosting town hall meetings in 5 locations across the United States. We recently had our first town hall in Los Angeles, where judges came down from the bench and had answered questions from the communities that they serve, and Mr. Smiley did an excellent job with that first town hall. So we're very excited for that, and stay tuned for more of those PBS broadcasts. The second initiative that we are supporting is a National Procedural Fairness Education and Training Project, which is providing both in-person and online training and education for judges and court managers on procedural fairness. This project is a joint effort between the Center for Court Innovation, the National Center Institute for Court Management, and the National Judicial College. All the training courses are available for free through our funding, and they'll be made available online as well. So I strongly encourage you, when those come out, to take advantage of them. There's already been some trainings across the U.S., including here in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. And SJI's support has, I think, been really integral in trying to get these resources out there as quickly as possible. You heard today about fines and fees. This is another major initiative of SJI's. We helped launch the CCJ COSCA National Task Force on Fines, Fees, and Bail Practices, and which will really look at these issues post-Ferguson. A little bit on the slides, I want to talk a little bit about technology and how the courts are performing. It was figure 3, which talks about the job being done by the state courts. And frankly, what we're seeing and hearing is that, court users really don't want to have to come to court. They would rather handle these issues if they can, either by themselves or online. Coming to court, they have to miss work and everything else that goes along with that. And we mentioned, Judge Burke mentioned sort of the intimidation factor. Well, if you can handle this online and you're nervous about showing up in a courtroom and going through security, well, all the more better for the court user. So embracing remote technology is a important aspect for us at SJI. We are trying to encourage courts to use remote technology, whether it's in hearings or interpreters. This is the wave of the future, and I think that a lot of courts are already jumping on board with that. But just sort of thinking through how you as court managers can make a difference, and Stephanie will talk a lot more about this, but sort of how do you engage your court users in providing that meaningful feedback on your performance, thinking about ways of doing that, whether it's surveying or other methods. How do you act on that feedback? Because you got to show your court users that you're acting on what they provided you. Explaining court processes. These are all things that you all think about every day, so that the court user doesn't leave court not understanding what the heck just happened to them, right? How do you assist court users before they get to court? And this is what we really want to focus on. Again, remote technology, online dispute resolution. I'm very happy to announce that just a few months ago, we awarded 2 grants, one to the state of Utah and one to the state of New York, to develop online dispute resolution platforms. For Utah, it's cases $10,000 and below. And for New York, it's consumer debt cases, so that you don't have to come to court for these cases anymore in Utah and New York once these platforms are rolling. You can still choose to come to court, but there will be a way for you to handle these cases online. So this is what our State Court Administrator Dan Becker likes to call not necessarily cutting edge, but bleeding edge for the courts. So, but we have supported many grants to help the courts with these issues, especially public trust and confidence, which we are certainly interested in. Clearly, there are a lot of policy decisions that have to be made at the legislative, Supreme Court levels, but there's so much that can be done at the trial court level as well. For example, we just got awarded a grant to Cuyahoga County, Ohio, to develop online videos, a welcome to the court online videos, based on some of the feedback that they received from their court users. What are the things that court users need to know before they get to court? And so they asked those questions and responded with this project. So SJI is here to help you if you have ideas or projects that you would like to pursue. That's our goal, is to help you with those, and feel free to contact me anytime to talk about those projects. I'll be happy to sort of guide you through the process of applying for SJI grants and administering those grants if you're awarded. But now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to talk about a little more broadly about public trust and confidence, efforts in her state of Ohio, and what you as court managers can do to address these issues.
Thanks, Jonathan. Oh, that's loud. So I'm gonna wear the lapel mic just because we're gonna be using the pole everywhere, and Jesse's gonna end up driving the technology, and I don't want to get in his way because I'll mess things up. But Jonathan was exactly right. So we've now heard from Jesse about the national survey. So we've heard about all the national information that we've been able to collect. And then Jonathan has talked kind of the next level down, what SJI is doing to try to help local courts figure out how to respond to the survey results. And so I think we need to take it down one step further. So as court administrators, boots on the ground people, what is it that we can do to help our judges and our communities in making a difference in reaction to the survey results that we've been given, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about some things that I have seen. I really want to hear from all of you what you all are doing. You know, one of the great things about NACM is that we can all network, right? We can talk to each other and discuss challenges that we've had, and also how we've responded to those challenges. So I really want you all to start interacting a little bit more, to talk about what you've done in your jurisdictions and ask each other questions so that we can do some information sharing. But because I think it really is important that we try to address this. And you may have seen in the spring edition of the Court Manager that came out, Jesse was kind enough to write an article for the Court Manager about this survey. So you may have seen that article, so you might be familiar with the survey results. And then as Scott mentioned, I just did a piece in the Court Manager that just came out last week, kind of following up and tag teaming off of the article that Jesse had done about what that means for us as court administrators and how we need to begin to try to figure out how to move the ball down the field, if you will, and make some inroads in reaction to the survey. So it's something that NACM has really put a lot of effort and time into, and something that we want to be able to assist you all, along with Jonathan, in making some changes. So Jesse's going to do this poll everywhere, poll something. We're polling something.
Let's see. Oh, excellent. Good. Okay, so now here's the part where we're turning it over to ask you guys some questions, get some real-time responses, and see how it works. All right, so in order to participate in this real-time poll, you can either use the app. Have people had success with downloading the app? Poll everywhere. Some people have got it.
Okay.
Okay, good. You will see if you open the app, or if you go to the mobile website, which is pollev.com. If you go there, you should find a portal to say that you're participating in a survey. People seeing that? Okay, so you need to enter SOSC, which is State of State Courts, SOSC, as the, forget what they call it. It's pollev.com. SOSC is the keyword to get into this particular survey, and hopefully you're seeing something that looks like this and it says it's locked, right? So I'm going to press a button here. It's going to open up the opportunity for you to make a choice on this question. The first question is focused on really on sort of self-help issues, and we want to know which of these three options would make the biggest difference in your court. You may be doing one of these already, you may be doing two of these already. We want you to focus on forward-looking. So forget about any successes that you've had so far. We want to know what is the thing you would like to do next that you think would have the biggest impact. All right, so
On your mark.
that said, I'm going to press the start button here, and your polls should open, and you will have 30 seconds to make a choice. Emma.
Oh, technology.
SOSC. All right, let's try this again.
Oh, shoot.
Come on. Yeah, it'll show you as being locked for the moment until I can unlock it. This is the challenge here. Okay? All right, now you should be able to enter an option for one of these, and they've got a 30-second timer on it, so you can change your mind as often as you want. But you can only vote once.
I feel like we need like the Jeopardy music playing in the background. I'm not going to sing though. No.
No?
No.
Singing? Okay. Okay. Stephanie is going to analyze the results momentarily. All right, so there we go. Oh, it's a split.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. What are you all currently doing that you feel like is making inroads? Do you have some data that is telling you that what you're doing is good? And if there's anything that you're seeing here that is surprising you based on what you're already doing? Does this information surprise you at all? No? Why not? Juna.
There's definitely a need increase in technology to be accessible to our customers. That's just a given. In terms of dedicated staff support, I think in terms of budgetary constraints, sometimes we face trouble with hiring more staff to provide support to our self-represented litigants.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Vicki from Minnesota. I think one of the things we're facing is, we have the forms online, but they're not fillable, and so we need to do a better job, I think, of creating fillable forms. But in reality, it's the self-represented litigants who need a lot of help. And I think, more dedicated personnel to help that process. We have a lot of it in our law libraries, but I think we need to do a better job of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised that there's a split between dedicated staff support and a website or an app, because it's really driven by the age of the users. Our older ones have no interest in a website or an app. They need a person showing them the process. Our younger people come in and they do not want to talk to the folks that are there.
They don't want to interact.
They do not. They ask, is there a website I can go to where I can take care of it? So I think that for right now, we need that staff support. I think if we project out 10 years or even less, we won't even need a physical building or a physical place where the people go. We'll just direct them to a website.
Absolutely. And thinking a little bit about Jonathan's saying that SJI is really stressing technology. So if we're leveraging technology in a more efficient manner, maybe that will impact the amount of staff that we need. So maybe that kind of relationship is a little bit even closer than what we originally thought.
I'm actually a little surprised about the amount of people are saying staff support. I mean, we've got, I think, pretty dedicated staff, and over the years, always the struggle has been, where's the line between legal advice and procedural advice? And I think we're pretty good with that. I think right now, what we just did to get on this, the fact that it was 3 or 4 clicks and we all got it, That's what we need. When we go up to the website, I am glad that it's 22% for improved forms, because if you go up right now, you don't know what you're doing, and you start reading through the forms, you're done in about half a page. You're just frustrated.
Right.
Because you need something like this, where, what are you trying to do? Push the
Right.
button. So it's interesting that the staff support part.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking a little bit too, since a couple of you had mentioned forms. So yeah, we've got the forms, but they need to be fillable, and they need to be written in a language that a normal person understands, right? Because we live in a world that's filled with a lot of jargon. I mean, even just saying pro se litigant. They don't know they're a pro se litigant. They know they're a self-represented litigant, but they don't know they're a pro se litigant. So looking at what's on our websites, our forms, our instructions, everything from soup to nuts on the website, making sure that it's something that the public is going to understand when they look at it, I think is probably a big issue as well. Has anybody taken steps to try to clean up the language on your websites to make it a little bit more user-friendly? Any comments about how that process has gone for any of you that have raised your hands? Any tips or tricks that you can share for the rest of us?
Well, we're trying to use an intelligent forms application to complete the forms, so they're not just fillable, but I mean, they, like TurboTax, you go through a
Right.
series of questions.
And it generates
And our
portions.
feeling is that the questions that they ask on the application can be like questions that normal people would ask each other, whereas the form probably still has to be in legalese. So.
Right.
I'm Eunice from Miami 11th Circuit. We're in the process of redoing our website to make it more user-friendly. And I have to tell you that it's been a huge battle with our different divisions to get them to speak in layman's terms, because we're so used to judiciary, pro se, plaintiff, defendant. It's been a real battle to get people to stop. Just think like a normal person on the street, they're not going to get this. So persistence.
Yes, we are not normal people, right?
I'm Amy from Los Angeles, and one of the things that we did that we saw a drastic improvement on was we introduced an avatar for traffic help. And so what they were finding was a lot of individuals were in our lines and they didn't need to be there. And so they introduced, her name's Gina, and she's an avatar. And if you go to Los Angeles Court's website, she'll walk litigants through a ticket and what they can do and that type of a thing. And so, and on another point you mentioned about the dedicated staff support, I've had an opportunity to be on the other side, being a customer for another county, because I recently adopted my son. And so I was able to talk with other individuals through the process. And even though in California we do have forms that are fillable, there are individuals that aren't doing it themselves. They're reaching out to hire an attorney, and it's that because they're afraid, I don't want to mess it up. And so maybe having something to where when they're going to the forms, having a person, if we get to the point where we have that dedicated support staff, where someone could submit a quick question, I just want to make sure that I have, these are the 3 forms that I need. And so as soon as someone gets overwhelmed, then they're reaching out and having an attorney and those things. So.
Yeah, because so many times, like when you're shopping online, and a lot of times you'll have that online chat, and a box will pop up. Is there something I can help you with? Yeah, something similar. That's great. Next question.
I'm going to put Avatar on the list for next year.
There we go.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. This will just take a second. Does anybody have any problems with the app or the technology? I want to make sure that everybody is able to participate who wants to.
We good?
Okay, good. All right, so we're going to do it again. Open up your app. You should see a lock screen. Again, for those who need to re-enter, it's SOSC to get us in there. And we're going to do the same thing we did last time. So here we go to a slightly different question. The technology gain that would most improve my court's operations would be electronic filing, a new CMS, or a website or an app. And again, we're looking forward here, forgetting what you've done in the past. What's the one thing we'd want to do moving forward to make this to be the biggest gain? All right, this should kick in. And you've got 30 seconds.
have no predictions.
Is it working for everybody? Okay, great. Amazing.
I know, technology is wonderful. When it works, we're golden.
All right, 33 people responded. That's fantastic. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. There we go.
So let's kind of do the same thing that we did on the last one and just look at the results. And I was wondering if this was going to happen because of the way the question is worded, because we didn't really say who the technology gain is for, right? So is it a gain for you and your staff, or is it a gain for the public, or maybe it's both? So any responses to that? Electronic filing, far and above, right? So I imagine when you think about electronic filing, you're really thinking, the first thing that pops to your mind is how great that's going to be for your staff, right? Because all that work that can be moved off of the staff in the court or in the clerk's office and moved to the filer. So that's probably a huge gain for you, but what about for the public? How would that impact the survey results that we have seen? Can you think of any ways? You don't have to raise your hand. You can just run up to the mic.
Eunice from Miami again. This could be a function of the way we've implemented e-filing, our clerks, but we get a lot of calls from the public and even from some staff at law firms with questions about how do I submit this e-filing. Apparently it's so intricate what they have to put in the subject line and things like that. So we get a lot of questions about that. I'm curious if some of our other circuits are experiencing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's room for improvement there,
right?
For us.
Yes, absolutely. Is anybody else experiencing the same thing with their e-filing systems? Bless you.
We have a variety of e-filing systems in Delaware that we're trying to get under everyone under one e-filing system within the next year or so, fingers crossed. But I think the frustration with the filers has to do with the rejection, and that's usually structured not by the technology but by the courts.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of it is understanding, using the technology, that it can be as a structure that's sort of as transparent as possible can help with that.
Right. And we're always struggling with that disconnect between providing information and providing legal advice, right? I mean, how many times have you walked past the clerk's office and people are saying, I can't provide legal advice, I can't help you with this. So just educating the folks at the counter as to what is legal advice versus what is just information that you need to submit with your filing or information that you are required to have on the form makes a huge difference too. I think we've got one more question left that we want to do, and while Jesse's doing that, I want to tell just a quick story about how important it is for us to be engaged in this topic. How many of you, in the plenary, you heard a reference to the National Center's court tools, and there is a core tool measure that is focused on access and fairness, and that's Court Tool Measure 1, where we survey participants that come into the court. How many of you have implemented Court Tool Measure 1? A few of you. Do you think that information will help to kind of direct you in combating some of the things that we're seeing in this survey? Is there any kind of connection there, do you think? Maybe a little bit?
I think it helps. I think the manner in which it is put into effect has a great deal of effect on what the outcome is. I mean, we usually one day a year will pass out surveys to individuals who are leaving the courthouse, and I think it's a pretty established aspect about surveying in that manner that it tends to skew your results to either people who are wildly enthusiastic about your organization or people who cannot stand it and want to write some huge diatribe against it. And the folks in the middle, who are usually the largest section of the bell curve, are the ones who probably won't fill it out and they're the ones who are going to walk by you and just say, I don't have time. So I think there's a benefit to it, but I think it's very guarded as to exactly how effective that method is.
Mm-hmm.
We do it, and it's good as an indicator. The problem is it's not telling you causation. It's not telling you
Right.
how to solve the issue, and that's been the problem right now, because the direction is, look, you have an issue here. What are you going to do about it? And you need more analysis. We need a bridge between that and actually getting something done to affect the surveys.
Right.
I often think that people are on their best behavior when we're doing court surveys, all across the board. I often wonder if we shouldn't go to like fast food chains and hire people to do quality assurance. They go around, they test certain things, and how people are responding to them. It just makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, all right, so we're at our final question, and this one is definitely customer service focused. The people or thing that offers the biggest customer service challenge at my court is, and your three options are inside the courtroom, and you can interpret that in any way you want, depending on what you find inside your courtroom, support staff, or the state of your website. So this is the biggest customer service challenge at my court. We are going to do this again, and hopefully you will have 30 seconds. Everybody is all set to go. SOSC is the code to access, and you've got 30 seconds. Yes, you have to pick one. The question is the biggest challenge.
You can't say all of the above, Jeff.
Okay, and we have another split.
So, and we go back to this whole issue of technology that Jonathan was talking about. So I think there's definitely a lot of things that we can do on the technology end. Inside the courtroom, what were you all thinking, those of you that chose inside the courtroom? Were you thinking the person on the bench? Okay, good. Just checking. Everyone inside the courtroom, right?
The in-court process.
The in-court process.
Forms, notices, everybody moving back and forth.
Yes, signing the forms, the notices, even the judge speaking from the bench and going so quickly, the clerk that's in the courtroom, or the bailiff or the assistant, whoever's in the courtroom, shuffling papers around. And we've got attorneys that are moving all over the place all the time, and if you're not familiar with the players, you don't know who's on what side, and I'm sure it's very confusing to folks that are in there. So I think this is really good information that we can certainly dig into if we had a lot more time. But we're almost out of time. And one more thing that I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention, just so that we can kind of come full circle. I think we've done a really good job of looking at everything from a broad perspective here, and you all are digging in a little bit and helping each other with ideas that you've had in your courts with the avatars and the self-help centers and so on and so forth. So that's all really good information. Let me just leave you with this one parting little bit of information too. We've been preparing for this session for a few weeks, and I just so happened to open up our clip service on Friday. I'm from Ohio, and the Dayton Daily News had an article on Friday, and the headline was something about NAACP calls community forums to talk about the judicial system. I was like, oh, this is perfect, this is great, I'm excited, this is going to be really good. So I was really excited to see that Ohio was moving forward in that in Dayton. And then when I read this story, I was really disappointed because the court was not mentioned at all. So I'm happy that there is a group that is moving it forward, and they're calling together the community and having some open forums to talk about what's going on with the judicial system. Are there sentencing disparities? Are there folks that are feeling left out of the process? But I was really hoping, as I read down through the article, that it would say the courts are involved and the courts are going to be there and the courts are excited about getting the feedback, and something about the court being engaged, and there was nothing. So I think that kind of brings it all together, from what we heard in the plenary this morning to the exercise that we've gone through here later this morning. that as court administrators and judges, as court administrators in particular, we need to make sure that the judges are seeing what the issues are, that they're engaged, that we can figure out how to engage with community groups so that we can move the needle, so that we can respond to the survey results and we can make a difference. Because as Jesse said at the very beginning, this is our core mission, right? This is our core function of the courts, and we're missing the mark. So we need to figure out what we can do to do better, right? So I thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating. I hope that you've made some good connections and you can have some good conversations leaving the room about other things that you can do. Any other questions or comments? The rest of the panel? Okay, well, thank you all. We are back in the general session room for the lunch and business meeting. So thank you.